My sister mocked. Bet you can't afford dinner here. Just then the waiter smiled. Welcome back, Miss Dara. Shall I prepare your regular table? Dad almost dropped his glass while my sister's grin froze. The truth about who really belonged here was exposed. The moment I stepped out of the car, I knew exactly what this dinner was meant to be. A performance. My sister had picked the most extravagant restaurant in town, the kind with velvet chairs and a wine list that read like a novel. She wasn't trying to include me. She was trying to remind me of where I stood. Or where she thought I stood. 2 days earlier she'd called me out of nowhere. We're taking Dad to dinner Friday, she said, her voice light, almost rehearsed. You can come, if you're free. That pause after come told me everything. She didn't expect me to say yes. She didn't want me there. I could hear it in her tone, like she was offering me a seat at a table she didn't think I deserved. I'll be there, I replied calmly. I didn't give her the satisfaction of hesitation. There was a beat of silence on the other end. Then a short, clipped, okay. I spent the next day thinking about all the times I'd been the outsider. The forgotten sibling. The one who didn't get the applause, the praise, the attention. My sister had always been the golden child. Perfect grades, perfect job, perfect life. I was the quiet one, the one who worked late, who missed family dinners, who didn't fit their mold. But I'd built something they never saw. And tonight they would. Friday came. I chose my outfit carefully, not to impress but to feel like myself. A navy blue dress, simple and elegant. A silver pendant I'd bought after my first big client deal. I didn't need glitter. I needed grace. I arrived at Dad's house early. He looked tired but cheerful. You sure you want to come? He asked, half joking. It's one of those places with tiny portions and big prices. I smiled. I'll manage. The drive was quiet. My sister sat in the front, chatting with Dad about her latest real estate deal. I sat in the back watching the city blur past. The streets were familiar but the silence between us wasn't. I thought about all the times I'd been left out. Family vacations planned without me, birthdays where my name was barely mentioned, achievements dismissed as cute. I'd learned to stop expecting recognition. But tonight something felt different. Not because I wanted revenge. I just wanted truth. We pulled up to the restaurant. It was one of those places with valet parking and gold-plated signage. My sister stepped out first, her heels clicking confidently against the pavement. She adjusted her coat and glanced back at me. Try not to look too surprised, she said. I didn't respond. Inside the lighting was soft and warm. The air smelled of rosemary and aged wine. A pianist played in the corner and the clinking of glasses echoed gently through the room. My sister walked ahead, greeting the hostess with a rehearsed smile. I stayed a few steps behind, letting the ambience settle around me. It wasn't new to me. I'd been here before, many times in fact. But they didn't know that. We were seated near the window. My sister took the seat facing the room as always. Dad sat beside her. I took the remaining chair, quietly unfolding my napkin. The menu arrived and she immediately began pointing out the prices. Look at this, she said, nudging Dad. $200 for a steak. Can you imagine? Dad chuckled. Hope you brought your wallet, Dara. I smiled. I did. She wasn't done. They have a wine list thicker than a textbook. I bet you've never seen half these names. I glanced at the list. I'd tasted most of them. I've had the Chateau Margaux, I said casually. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? I nodded. It's smooth. Pairs well with lamb. Dad looked at me puzzled. When did you start drinking fancy wine? I shrugged. Here and there. My sister leaned back, clearly trying to recalibrate. She wasn't used to me knowing things she didn't. The waiter arrived. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile. Good evening, he said. Would you like to hear the specials? My sister jumped in. Yes, please. And maybe recommend something affordable. She laughed, glancing at me. The waiter's eyes shifted. Then they lit up. Miss Dara, he said, turning to me. Welcome back. Shall I prepare your regular table? The silence that followed was thick. My sister blinked. Dad's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. I nodded. This table is fine. Thank you. The waiter smiled. Of course. Would you like the usual starter? The beet carpaccio. I nodded again. Yes, and the Margaux, please. He bowed slightly and walked away. My sister stared at me. You've been here before? Her voice was tight. I met her gaze. Many times. Dad leaned forward. You never mentioned it. I folded my hands. You never asked. The rest of the meal passed in a strange haze. My sister was quieter. Dad kept glancing at me as if trying to piece together a version of me he hadn't seen before. I let them sit with it. I didn't need to explain everything. Not yet. But I remembered. I remembered the first time I came here alone after a long day at work. I just signed my first solo contract. I wanted to celebrate, but I had no one to call. So I came here, sat by the window and ordered the Margot. The waiter had been kind, treating me like I belonged. I kept coming back. It became my place. My quiet victory. Now, sitting across from the people who had always seen me as lesser, I felt something shift. Not anger. Not pride. Just clarity. They didn't know me. Not really. And maybe they never would. But tonight they saw a glimpse. As dessert menus arrived, my sister tried to regain control. Well, she said, forcing a smile, I guess you've been keeping secrets. I looked at her. Not secrets. Just stories you never cared to hear. Dad sighed. We should have asked more. I nodded. It's okay. I found my way. The waiter returned with the wine. To Miss Dara, he said, pouring gently. Always a pleasure. My sister looked down. Dad raised his glass. I did too. The invitation hadn't been meant for me. But I came anyway. And this time I didn't just show up, I arrived. The waiter's words hung in the air like perfume. Soft, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. Welcome back, Miss Dara, he said with a warmth that didn't need explanation. Shall I prepare your regular table? My sister blinked, her lips parted but silent. Dad looked at me, then at the waiter, then back again. I nodded gently. This one's fine, I said. The waiter bowed slightly and walked off, leaving behind a silence that felt louder than any insult they'd ever thrown my way. We sat there, the three of us, in a corner that felt suddenly too intimate. My sister shifted in her seat, her confidence visibly shaken. Dad cleared his throat, fiddling with the edge of his napkin. I could feel their questions pressing against the silence, but I didn't offer answers. Not yet. This place had been mine long before tonight. Years ago, when I worked just 3 blocks away, I'd discovered it by accident. I'd been walking home late, exhausted and hungry, and saw the soft glow of its windows. I stepped in, unsure, and was greeted with kindness. That first night, I sat alone at the bar, ordered a modest meal, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. It became my ritual. Every Friday, after a week of meetings and deadlines, I'd come here. At first, it was just a treat. Then it became something more. A sanctuary. A space where I wasn't someone's sister or someone's daughter. I was just Dara. The staff learned my name, my preferences, my moods. They didn't care about my family or my past. They saw me. And that was enough. I glanced around the room now, recognizing faces, waiters who'd served me for years, the hostess who always remembered my table, even the pianist who once played my favorite tune without being asked. My sister and Dad sat in a world they thought they knew, but they were guests here. I wasn't. Dad leaned in slightly. You've been here before? His voice was soft, almost hesitant. I nodded. Many times. My sister tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. Well, you've certainly kept that quiet. I looked at her. You never asked. That was the truth of it. They never asked. Not about my job, my friends, my weekends. They assumed I lived in the margins of their story, a supporting character with no plot of her own. But I had built a life, quietly, steadily, and without their applause. I remembered the first time I walked in here after my promotion. I'd been nervous, unsure if I belonged. I wore a blazer that still had the tag tucked inside, and my heels clicked awkwardly on the marble floor. I ordered a glass of wine and sat by the window watching the city move. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would build a life that didn't need their approval. I would stop waiting for recognition and start living for myself. The waiter returned with our drinks. He placed mine gently, then turned to my sister. Would you like a recommendation, ma'am? She nodded stiffly. Sure. He offered a few options, but she barely listened. Her eyes kept drifting toward me, trying to decode the version of me she hadn't seen before. Dad broke the silence again. So, what do you do now, Dara? I looked at him, surprised. He'd never asked that before. I run a consulting firm, I said. We work with mid-sized businesses on restructuring and growth. He blinked. Really? That sounds impressive. I smiled. It keeps me busy. My sister sipped her wine, then set the glass down too quickly. You never mentioned any of this. Her tone was accusatory, but underneath it I heard something else. Uncertainty. I met her gaze. You never asked. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Dad leaned back, his expression thoughtful. My sister's shoulders had lost their stiffness. The waiter returned with appetizers, and I noticed how he placed mine with a familiarity that didn't need words. My sister watched him, then looked at me. You really come here often? I nodded. Every week. She didn't respond. Instead, she picked at her salad, her mind clearly elsewhere. I could see it, the recalibration happening in real time. She was trying to fit this version of me into the narrative she'd always believed. But it didn't fit. I wasn't the quiet, struggling sibling anymore. I was someone she didn't know. Just then a familiar voice called out. Miss Dara. I turned to see the restaurant manager walking toward us, smiling broadly. I saw your name on the reservation and had to come say hello. He reached our table and nodded politely to Dad and my sister. Is she treating you both tonight? Dad chuckled nervously. Apparently. The manager turned to me. Would you like your usual dessert? We just brought in fresh berries. My sister's jaw dropped. She has a usual dessert? The manager smiled. Of course. Ms. Dar's the reason we added it to the menu. She suggested the pairing and it became a hit. He winked. You've got good taste. I thanked him and he walked away. My sister stared at me, speechless. Dad looked amused but also a little lost. I could see the wheels turning in their heads. They were realizing how much they didn't know. How many chapters of my life they'd skipped. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I simply sat there, present and calm. For once, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing the work. My sister finally spoke. I guess I've underestimated you. Her voice was quiet, almost reluctant. I looked at her. You didn't underestimate me. You ignored me. She flinched slightly, then nodded. Fair. Dad reached for his glass. I'm proud of you, Dara. I wish I'd known sooner. I smiled gently. It's never too late. The rest of the meal unfolded in a strange, quiet harmony. The tension had shifted. The roles had changed. And for the first time I felt seen, not because I demanded it but because I'd earned it. They had never asked about my life. But tonight they were finally listening. The crème brûlée arrived with a soft clink, its golden crust glistening under the candlelight. The waiter placed it gently in front of me, then set down the others with quiet precision. My sister stared at hers, spoon untouched. Her voice broke the silence, low and uncertain. Why didn't you tell us? I didn't look up right away. I let the question settle, let her feel the weight of it. Then I met her eyes. You never asked. She blinked as if the simplicity of my answer caught her off guard. But it wasn't meant to be clever. It was just the truth. For years I'd lived in the quiet corners of their lives, showing up when expected, fading when convenient. They never asked. And I stopped offering. Dad shifted in his seat, his brow furrowed. I didn't know you'd come this far. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. I smiled, not out of pride, but from a memory that surfaced without warning. I was 12. I'd won a school award, Best in Literature. I'd written a short story that made my teacher cry. The ceremony was on a Thursday evening. Dad missed it. He was at my sister's piano recital, front row, clapping like she'd won the world. I'd stood on that stage alone, holding a certificate that felt suddenly small. That night I cried into my pillow, telling myself it didn't matter. But it did. Tonight I wasn't alone. And that mattered. My sister picked up her spoon, tapped the crust, then set it down again. I didn't mean to make you feel less. Her voice was tight, defensive. I tilted my head. Do you remember prom? She looked confused. What about it? I couldn't afford a dress, I said. You laughed. Said I could borrow one of your old ones, but only if I promised not to ruin it. Her face flushed. I was joking. I nodded. Maybe. But it stayed with me. She looked down, stirring the custard without eating it. I didn't know it hurt you that much. I leaned forward. You made me feel small. But I grew anyway. Dad exhaled slowly, his eyes glossy. I should have paid more attention. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Regret doesn't rewrite history. But acknowledgement, it's a start. The waiter returned, refilling our glasses. I lifted mine, letting the light catch the rim. To quiet victories, I said. He smiled, nodding. Dad raised his glass. My sister hesitated, then followed. She didn't speak, but her eyes met mine. And in that moment something shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. The rest of dessert passed in silence. Not the awkward kind. The reflective kind. I watched the candle flicker, casting soft shadows across the table. My sister's posture had changed. Less rigid, more inward. Dad looked older somehow, like he'd aged in the last hour. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently. When the check arrived, my sister reached for it. I'll get this, she said. I placed my hand over hers. No. I invited myself. I'll pay. He looked at me, surprised. You don't have to. I smiled. I want to. She didn't argue. Just leaned back, watching me sign the receipt with a pen the waiter offered. It felt symbolic somehow, me closing the evening not as a guest but as someone who belonged. We stood to leave. Dad adjusted his coat and my sister wrapped her scarf around her neck. Outside the air was crisp, the kind that wakes you up. The valet brought the car around and we waited quietly. As we walked out, I noticed how the silence had changed. No more mocking. No more pretending. It wasn't heavy, it was honest. I didn't need their approval anymore. I had built something real. And for the first time they saw me, not as the girl who couldn't afford dinner but as the woman who did. We reached the car. Dad opened the door for me, a gesture he hadn't made in years. My sister slid into the passenger seat without a word. I sat in the back just like before. But this time it didn't feel like the back seat of their story. It felt like my own space. As we drove, the city lights blurred past. Dad spoke first. You know, I always thought you were just quiet. I smiled. I am. But quiet doesn't mean invisible. My sister turned slightly. You've changed. I met her gaze. No. You just never looked close enough. She didn't respond. But her expression softened. That was enough. We reached Dad's house. He invited me in for tea but I declined. Another time, I said. He nodded, understanding. My sister lingered by the door. Thanks for coming, she said. I nodded. Thanks for inviting me. She hesitated. I didn't mean it like that. I smiled. I know. As I walked to my car, I felt the weight of the evening settle in my chest. Not heavy but full. Full of things unsaid, things finally heard, and things that would take time to heal. I started the engine, letting the warmth fill the cabin. Before pulling away, I looked back at the house. The porch light was on. My sister stood in the doorway watching me. She raised a hand just slightly. I returned the gesture. The table had turned. Not with drama. Not with vengeance. But with truth. And sometimes that's the most powerful shift of all.